Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming along. We are joined tonight, as I'm sure you're aware, by the erstwhile DJ, writer, sometime record producer, one-time front man, occasional chef. The list goes on.
It really doesn't.
Oh, okay. Well, let's leave it there then.
It ends pretty abruptly after that.
Okay. Oh, well. But, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bill Brewster. I just thought I went straight in for the intro there. I was instructed to give a few housekeeping rules, by the way, by Jamie. Hi. EHFM broadcasting this eventually, and they're filming tonight, as you may be able to see. So if everyone can just make sure their phones are off, that would be real nice, thanks. And what else did I have to say? Oh yeah, Bill's playing later on at Sneaky Pete's, so I hope you're all coming down to that, regardless of whatever your arrangements might be tomorrow morning. Just come down for an hour, whatever. I'm doing that, so should be fun, right? You looking forward to that?
Yeah, I always like playing there.
It's a great little spot. You've done that sort of once or twice now, I guess.
This would be maybe the 5th or 6th time I've
Oh,
played
Jamie's
there.
right. Okay,
Yeah.
I've not done my research. Okay, yes, this is the 5th or 6th time you played there, isn't it, Bill? Yeah. Cool. Okay, moving swiftly on. So, the premise for tonight. I'm going to try not to have the mic right in front of my face. How's that for a level, by the way? Is that okay? Okay. I like the close mic technique. I feel it's a kind of comforting thing. You may or may not be able to tell this is the first time I've ever interviewed anyone, let alone on a stage, so bear with me while I try really hard not to do the full partridge. So, yeah. I'm reassured that I'm in capable hands here with Bill, who's been interviewed numerous times and certainly has interviewed a fair few people in his time, I'm sure. But you can tell us all about that as we go on. So the premise for this sort of tour you're doing, Bill, is 60 Not Out. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's just a device to kind of go around the country and talk shit to people in different towns, I guess. I've been involved in the industry since Christmas 1981, so nearly 40 years now in total.
Wow.
A lot of that kind of involved in the industry, but not earning money from it.
I know that one.
But as a kind of peripheral enthusiast.
Yeah.
And it still is. I'm still coming to terms with the fact that I've got a senior rail card. It's kind of, it's pretty mental, really. Free prescriptions. I mean, it's the benefits are endless.
Well, I'm looking forward to it myself, to be honest.
That was another reason to come to Edinburgh. It's 35 quid with a senior rail card. I mean, why wouldn't you?
Indeed. With this beautiful weather we're having as well.
Exactly. I said, take me somewhere sunny.
Yeah. And they didn't listen to a word you said. Well, you take me somewhere that I can see all the sights as long as they're within 3 feet of my face. So I figured we'd spend a bit of time this evening talking about... sorry, that was the other bit of thing I had to say at the start. Besides plugging EHFM, I just want to say thanks to Sweet Dram for helping bring this together. It really does go down very smoothly.
When I'm in Edinburgh, I always drink Sweet Dram.
Thanks, Bill. We won't tell them he's actually on vodka and tonic, but oops. Anyway, I figured tonight, this evening, tea time, whatever time we're on, we could talk a little bit about your early life, talk a bit about your sort of general journeying through DJing and how you got to it all. So you were born and raised in Grimsby, right?
Yeah.
And what were the sort of early things that brought you to music there?
Listening to Radio 1.
Yeah.
Going to the fairground.
Yeah.
But the big thing when I was a kid was going to the fairground. The fair used to come really often, and there was a bit of waste ground near where I lived. And for some reason, I don't know why, but fairgrounds in those days played black music before anybody else. So you'd hear things like Double Barrel by Dave Ansel and Collins. I heard that at the fair about 6 months before it came out.
Yeah.
So it became a place that we used to go and hang out just to listen to the music they were playing on the waltzers.
Yeah.
So music was important to me from an early age, but the access to music in those days wasn't like it is now, where you've got Spotify and everything. There were very limited places. We never had a dedicated record store in Grimsby, so you had to go to Boots or W.H. Smith's, or places like that where they had, a top 40 rack next to the makeup counter.
Yeah.
And at W.H. Smith's, behind the stationery, there was a little kind of record sort of grotto. So it was difficult to find music. But yeah, I listened to mainstream music, really. Stuff that was on Radio 1, pop music.
Yeah.
So that was my first encounter with it. But then when I got older, I started going to see bands playing. There were some bands that would come and play at the Cleethorpes Winter Gardens and the Cleethorpes Pier. The first band I saw was Leo Sayer. So,
Nice.
we didn't get the most exciting groups coming to Grimsby or Cleethorpes, but we did get some. But the one that changed my life was seeing the Sex Pistols. And they were on tour in December 1976, and they kept getting banned from loads of venues, and they were supposed to be playing in Leeds. The venue in Leeds banned them under pressure from the church, and at the last minute they booked them to come and play at Cleethorpes Winter Gardens. And December the 6th, 1976, I think it was, and I just left school and went to see them, and that's the kind of turning point of my life, really, when I became much more fanatical about music, was seeing the Sex Pistols, and then wanting to move down to London as quick as possible. I moved down about 5 months later when I was 17.
Yeah, so pretty young by a lot of people's standards.
Yeah,
Possibly.
yeah.
But you've still retained close ties to, your hometown.
Yeah, I mean, I've not really lived there for the last 40 years, but all of my family live there, and the football team that I support, are still there. So, the football team becomes part of, when you've lived away for so long, it becomes part of your identity, really, because it's a way of holding on to where you come from. And the roots of where you come from. And people obviously in London laugh at the fact that I support such a shit football team. But to me, it's about pride in the town that I grew up in. And I don't give a shit that they're not very good. At least they're my team. And my dad supported them, and my brother supported them, and one of my cousins played for them, and so that my granddad went to watch them play, and so it's a hugely important part of my life.
So it's integrity, Bill. There's deep connections as well, and I think that's obviously something that kind of.
I support a proper underground team, is what you're getting at. Not one of these shit pop teams like Manchester United.
Yeah.
I've got a proper underground team, mate.
Anybody can.
Oh, it's all test pressings at Blundell Park.
Yeah.
Acetates, test pressing.
Yeah. Lots of notebooks. The move to London, 77, pretty kind of tumultuous times down there, I imagine. And the chefing thing, did you fall into that? Did you intend to do that? Before you went, or did that happen?
before I went. I left school with no qualifications, so I didn't do very well at school. And my mum was a really good cook, so I thought I'll be a chef because she's really good. I'm bound to be all right at it. So I went to an FE college to train as a chef. But I was really lucky because in the first year I was at college, I had a really amazing teacher who was really inspiring, which is what I lacked at school. And he'd worked at the Dorchester in London, and he said, look, go and get a copy of the Egon Ronay Good Food Guide, find the 50 best restaurants in the country, send a letter to all of them, and I'll guarantee that you'll get a job when you leave college. And that's what happened. So I applied for jobs in the 50 best restaurants in the country, and I got offered one at the Berkeley in Knightsbridge, which is where Marcus Waring is head chef now. So I spent 3 years. I moved down in April '77 to work there. Spent 3 years working there, and then I moved to Switzerland and worked in a hotel there for 2 years. But a lot of that was kind of, I mean, I was really dedicated at the time, but looking back now, I think it was almost a kind of cover story for getting deeper into music, because that's sort of when I was really getting more and more obsessed with it.
But you can say in some ways that there's a great deal of similarities between the approach to chefing and the approach to DJing, and the kind of connections that you might have made in that world of chefing, social or otherwise, and obviously talking about, you know, how you went to the best restaurants and just applied for those gigs is very similar in a way to how you might later approach finding mentors with music.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a conscious thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I mean, I think there are similarities between cooking and DJing, actually. Yeah. I mean, it is about kind of putting things together and making them work and all of that kind of stuff. So there's definitely a connection, and there's quite a lot of people I know DJ who are actually really interested in cooking as well, and a few ex-chefs as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can definitely see parallels between it, although it wasn't particularly obvious to me at the time, because I wasn't really interested in DJing in the late 70s so much. I was much more punk, post-punk, ska revival, mod revival, that kind of thing. And then towards the end of my time at the Berkeley, there was this guy called Mick Stocks who was a chef, but he was also a soul boy. And he introduced me to kind of all-dayers. I remember him playing me like Linda Clifford albums and the live version of On Broadway by George Benson, and then stuff like Sadeo Watanabe, which now I think is pretty fucking boring music, but at the time I was like, wow, what musicianship and all that kind of stuff, which I suppose if you've been involved in punk, it's not very hard to kind of be impressive as a saxophonist if you've been listening to the Lurkers. Yeah. You know, if you've been listening to the Lurkers for 2 years, then it doesn't take much to kind of outshine that.
So what point did the frontman thing, the group therapy project, come along? I was trying to get Bill to bring up his single, the 7-inch single that he did with a band called Group Therapy. Unfortunately, he claims he can't find it, which was a bit disappointing. And I was trying to find ways to download it, but I'm very low tech, so I didn't manage to do that. Never mind. At some point we'll start playing some music that's maybe representative of that time, so we'll get to that. But sadly, it won't be Group Therapy. However, tell us a bit about how that came about.
Well, I'd been working for 2 years in Geneva and came back home to Grimsby because I was sort of thinking I don't really want to be a chef anymore, but equally I don't really know what I can do. I didn't have any qualifications to do anything else. And while this was happening, while I was kind of umming and ahhing about what I was going to do, some mates of mine in Grimsby were kind of disbanding their post-punk band, Skeleton Crew, and there was a gang of us went to see A Certain Ratio play a gig in Leeds at the beginning of December 1981, and it was when they were promoting Sextet, and we were completely blown away by how amazing they were live. Well, I'd seen them a couple of times before that, but they were much more shambolic then. It was when they were kind of going through their It Ain't Half Hot Mum sort of look. But they were incredible live, and basically everyone that went to that gig were like, we've got to start a band. And then they were like, we want you to be the singer, which is comical because, you know, as you would listen to the Group Therapy records on YouTube,
I think it still stands up, honestly. So go and check it out.
All right.
After you've done this.
Anyway, I was a shit singer, but I was quite a good front man, if you know what I mean. So
there was a lot of that about at the time. You know, a lot of people couldn't hit a note.
Yeah, I mean, what was great about punk rock was the feeling that you could have a go at anything.
Yeah.
And that was really important, because had that not happened, there's no way that I would have ever thought of the idea of joining a band or being capable of being in a band.
Mm-hmm.
So it was definitely punk that kind of gave me the impetus to think, okay, I can have a go at this. And the collection of people around me were actually, I realise now, were incredibly talented. I mean, the three of them have gone on to be professional musicians out of the, I think we were 6-piece to start with, and then an 8-piece in the second phase. But one of them, the sax player, Rich Pardee, played in Amy Winehouse's band, and also plays in Matthew Herbert's big band as well. So he's a fucking amazing sax player. We discovered him when he was a 15-year-old still at school. Right. So he was in that band. When we recorded the single, he was 15.
All right, wow.
And he was incredible then. I mean, he was my deficiencies were sort of masked by some fairly decent musicians.
Yeah. I mean, it still stands up for sure. So, I mean, do you think that kind of flirtation with pop stardom, even if it didn't lead to a career in that world, at least gave you the hunger for getting involved with music, and then eventually, I mean, DJing was a few years off still at that point, am I right?
Yeah, and the band split up kind of end of 83, and then a few of us started this other band, which kind of did all right, but it was didn't quite have the same direction as group therapy. But we did play a bit, you know, we kind of supported the Pogues on a couple of dates and did a few other things, played in Hull and played a few gigs in London and stuff like that. And when that came to an end in around 85, 86, and I'd been the one sort of making tapes I used to make these tapes between the bands and stuff like that. That's when I started DJing. But I started because I'd been a big record collector, and people started asking me if I wanted to play because they knew I had a lot of records, not because I had any talent as a DJ. So I started DJing really because I had a lot of records, more than I had any interest in being a DJ. But once I started doing it, I realised that was actually what I'd been looking for the whole time that I'd been involved in music, was the kind of... I'd always been one of those people that, like, you know, insisted on forcing my musical taste on my girlfriends by making them C90 cassettes and sitting there or watching them while they listened to them. So I sort of had that kind of, you know, really annoying DJ impulse in me right from when I was a young kid. And like I'd go to parties when I was 12 and bring all of my records and insist that I put them on, you know. I was just... So basically I was a DJ before I knew I was a DJ. Yeah, I think a lot of us in this room have been there. So,
So, while we're on the subject of attitude, and before we move on, we're going to play a bit of music throughout the event tonight, partly so that we can give our little tonsils a rest. This is one that stood out for me as a sort of semi-suitable replacement for the group therapy record. I'll get you to talk about this a wee bit afterwards, because I'm intrigued. I don't know anything about this one. This one is off Bill's... What have I done with it? Very awesome Tribal Rights compilation CD from a few years back. Is that right? 2-3 years ago? On Eskimo Recordings. This actually, the makeup of this kind of inspired my approach to tonight, in that it's a sort of chronological journey through your exposure to music and life in music, I guess. Is that right?
Roughly speaking, yeah.
He puts it much better in the liner notes, obviously. But yeah, this is a track that stands out for me from the first CD, which is a kind of dedicated to the post-punk type era. So before we move on from that era, let's have this. It's Gaffa, Attitude Dancing. I love this track. A bit slower than the group therapy, but still.
Dancing to a rhythm survey. Push about the beat, the organic shuffle way. We're attitude dancing to a rhythm survey. Push about the beat, the organic shuffle way. Living in the land of 1,000 doses dancing. this, you'd look photogenic.
So I'm starting to have a conversation with Bill here. I should probably do it on the mic. And you've got an idea. This is us halfway through the track. You can find the rest of it on YouTube or whatever. So you had this record at the time, right?
Yeah.
There's a few sort of more recent discoveries on this CD.
Yeah, there are. I'd say the majority on the first CD are things that I bought as new releases at the time.
It's one that had escaped my attention until you put it on this CD. What do you know about these people?
Not a great deal. I think that they were from Nottingham.
Right, okay. I can hear the vaguely northern twang, but there's not.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That kind of reminds me of the group therapy stuff. It's
It's
as edgy,
definitely along the same lines, the same sort of level of competence.
Yeah.
Yeah. With possibly a slightly better singer.
It's the attitude and the kind of vaguely wry lyrics as well that get me. I love that kind of shit.
Yeah.
It's the sort of stuff I would hear on John Peel when I was a kid, and I could only imagine what.
Well, I was a huge devotee of John Peel for many years. I mean, out of all the DJs that have inspired me, he probably has inspired me more than anyone.
Yeah.
And I used to tape his shows every night, and then I'd edit them together and make a best of each month. And I've still got about 20 of these tapes at home of my kind of best of John Peel tapes from 1985, 1986, 1987. And it's amazing how many of them actually, looking back, have got all of these kind of early electronic records on them, which I didn't even know what house music was at the time, but he was playing house before I knew house was house.
Yeah. I think that was some of my first sort of exposure to that, and I'm sure a lot of other people would say the same thing. So and that kind of brings us neatly on to you discovering house music, acid house, and so on and so forth. Because I think I saw you say in an interview how you didn't necessarily take house music seriously, even hearing it on John Peel, probably not knowing what it was. It was only when you went to clubs at a certain point that you started.
I'd bought a few house records, but I used to have a friend called Adrian who was the warm-up DJ at the Fridge in Brixton, and it was the only club I could get in on the guest list. So I used to go there quite a lot because I was a mature student at the time. I'd moved back down to London to do a degree, and I used to go and hang out in the DJ booth with him. And one night, Mark Moore was the guest. This was September 1987, and Mark came, and it was at that period where Rare Groove was huge in London, and there were like proper classics that everyone played, like I Believe in Miracles and Cross the Tracks and a bit of Schoolie D and some Go-Go, and there was almost a formula of what you played. And then Mark Moore came on and just played house music for 2 hours, and I was like, what the fuck is this? What a racket. So I really, really didn't get it. It really put me off it, actually. I was like, fuck. And I'd bought a few house records already, but I didn't know that they were house records. Anyway, for the next year and a half, I kind of avoided it. I just kind of was going out to like Rare Groove parties. And then me and an ex-girlfriend of mine got dumped around the same time. And we started hanging out together, and she was a bit of a... She was a bit of a fag hag, basically. So she was going to loads of gay clubs. And she's like, do you want to come with me to this club called Troll? Which was the kind of gay equivalent in London of Shum. So I was like, all right then. So I went to this club, and when I was there, she's like, do you want to... they're selling pills. Do you want to try one? I was like, yeah, all right. And then that was it. It was like unlocking the Pandora's box. And so I went to. I didn't go to a straight club for about 2 years after that. I was like, fucking hell, this is amazing.
I gotta say,
I couldn't possibly go to a straight club. It can't be as good as this.
Yeah, there was definitely. I mean, what era was that then? Was that
the first time I went was July '89, and then I went until it closed, which was September 91. It was around the time that Trade opened.
Right. Certainly, I think some of my first clubbing experiences, they were in places that were either mixed or gay friendly, and it just felt like those kind of clubs tended to have a better energy about them, Just the idea of abandon and tolerance and all those kind of things that make dance culture the wonderful thing that it is, you know.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I probably didn't realise how important gay culture was to dance. In fact, well, I definitely didn't appreciate how important it was. But as I got more and more into the kind of history of it, which probably came a little bit from house music, but more from moving to New York. So, but once I moved there, then I really started to fully comprehend how important gay culture was in the history of house music and the history of disco and the history of everything, really.
Yeah.
Anything to do with DJing.
Yeah.
But at that time, I didn't appreciate that. I just thought these clubs are a lot better than straight clubs.
Yeah.
And even when I went to another city, I'd like go to the gay club there rather than the straight club. I mean, I never went to the Hacienda when it was at its peak because I went to a club called the Number One all the time, which was like the best gay club in Manchester. So I just had a really weird blockage about straight clubs until the Ministry Sound opened. That was when I started going to straight clubs again.
Was that 92?
No, September 91 it opened.
So before that kind of era, you were writing at that point. When did the writing start? Was that kind of...
Okay, so I was already I'd been going out clubbing quite a long time, but I was a mature student at the Polytechnic of North London, and at the end of 1987, there was a football fanzine that I subscribed to called When Saturday Comes, and they advertised for a slave. And I
literally,
literally,
well,
it said slave, cool. And I answered the advert, and I think they liked the idea that I supported a shit football team. So because one of them supported Everton and one of them supported Chelsea, so I started working for When Saturday Comes free, basically carrying magazines to the post office and making coffee and all that kind of stuff. And then gradually, as I kind of got my feet under the desk, I started writing for it and then at the end of my second year at university, I was supposed to go away to France for a year, but I thought, the reason I'm doing a degree is so I don't have to cook for a living anymore, and I'm doing something that I love. So I sacked off college and thought I'll give it a year, see if I can make a living out of it in the next year. So all of us working on the magazine went on the government's enterprise allowance scheme. So we pretended to be freelance journalists while working on this fanzine that wasn't earning any money. And we got paid 40 quid a week by the government. And I was squatting in a tower block in Hackney, so I wasn't paying any rent. And I had a year of kind of trying to somehow make a living out of all of this. And while this happened, we organised a trip to Albania. And we got loads of publicity for this trip that we organised to Albania. We made up all these stories about how miniskirts were illegal in Albania and beards are banned and we made this.
Seems hard to believe.
We made this great show. We had a ceremonial shaving off of the beards in front of our offices, and fucking News at 10 came down and filmed it. And so the magazine went from a circulation of about 8,000 to 20,000 in 2 months because of all the publicity we got. So suddenly we were all earning a living from it. So that's how I got into writing. And then one day, a guy called Nick Gordon Brown was assistant editor at Mixmag. He called When Saturday Comes and said, we want someone to write some football-y kind of stuff in When Saturday Comes. And I answered the phone. And I started talking to him and said, actually, I go out clubbing every week anyway, so I'd love to do that. And that's how I started writing for Mixmag. That was 89 or 90.
Yeah.
But I'd already been going out clubbing since the early 80s, mainly in Nottingham and Leeds, and then when I moved back to London. So, it all sprang from that, really. Yeah. And then when I left When Saturday Comes, Nick offered me a full-time job working for DMC, which was the parent company of Mixmag.
Yeah.
So then I worked for Mixmag Update for a year as the editor.
Yeah.
And then at the end of that year, they asked me if I wanted to move to New York to run their New York office, which is how I came to live in New York.
Not a bad way to earn a living. So that was, you were saying earlier, it was like late 93?
Yeah, late
You ended up
'93
in
I
New York?
moved out there, and I came back end of '96.
For me, that was kind of the period that I was getting into house music, and particularly American house music. So I was reading those Mix Mag updates at the point that you were editing them, and yeah, they were just a great resource of information and just a real mind opener for me reading about particularly the New York stuff. So tell us a bit about your experience of New York. Who were the first sort of people that you kind of ran into there, and how by surprise did the whole scene take you?
Well, DMC was quite embedded in the dance community in New York, so they had a really good relationship with everybody there. And what I didn't realize before I moved there was it's actually a really small, close-knit scene, so it didn't take very long to actually meet everybody. And when I moved over there, they decided to have a leaving party for my predecessor and a welcome party for me. And they did it in the club in Brooklyn where Saturday Night Fever was filmed, with the lit up dance floor and everything.
Still had the lit up dance floor.
Yeah. So I can't remember I think it was. I can't remember the name of it now, but it was still going. It was in Bay Ridge in Brooklyn, and they invited everyone from the industry to come along, and so this welcome party, which happened like about 3 days after I got there. There's like Frankie Knuckles, David Morales, Benji Candelario, Danny Tenaglia, Judy Weinstein, Peter Dow, Vanessa Dow. It was fucking bonkers. It was basically like assembling everyone who was my hero into one room and being introduced to them all. So it was just completely mind-blowing for me. Wow. But what I didn't realise was it was the industry actually was quite tiny. Yeah. And, you know, within a few weeks, you would have met everybody anyway, because there's there used to be a record pool called For The Record, which was run by Def Mix and Judy Weinstein, called For The Record. And every Friday, all the DJs in New York and the New York area would go and hang out there. So that everyone would go and meet and see what promos were out. And even though I wasn't a member of For The Record, everyone used to go down there. So you'd just be kind of mingling with Frankie and Louis Vega and Kenny Dope Gonzalez, all of these guys. They were all hanging out there on a Friday. So it was pretty nuts, really, to go from worshipping all these guys in London to basically being quite friendly with them. Yeah. So, it was a proper eye-opener. Yeah. And I learned a huge amount being in New York and seeing these guys play every week. I mean, that was the most amazing thing about it, was going and seeing someone, because the guest DJ thing hadn't infected New York then. It was still this person plays in that club on a Friday, this person plays in that club on a Saturday. There's no warm-up DJ, there's nobody else, it's just them. Mm-hmm. So you go and I mean, the big one at the time was Junior Vasquez at the Sound Factory. So we were all completely obsessed with the Sound Factory. We'd go at like 1 or 2 in the morning and we'd stay till lunchtime on Sunday and just watch Junior for 10 hours and basically just kind of worship him.
I mean, I remember reading stories of his setups at the time, and, you know, the kind of, he had like, you know, a shower backstage and like all his records, and it was the kind of mythology of it was incredible. And I could only imagine what it was like to be there at the time. I was far too young to go over there, but
well, he had his DJ booth was kind of up there.
Yeah.
And the factory dance floor was just a really massive square with sort of stanchions, periodically on the dance floor, and his booth was sort of on the equivalent of the first floor, even though there wasn't a first floor. Yeah. So you'd walk in the ground floor, and on the ground floor there was a kitchen with a sink and everything, and a table with dining chairs, and then there was a spiral staircase that went up to the first floor, and there was a lounge with a 3-piece suite and, you know, all the kind of stuff you'd expect in a lounge. And then instead of going through and looking out the window, you went into his DJ booth. Yeah. And he had all of his records there.
Yeah.
So there were all of these bins with all of his records, and he refused to let anyone else DJ in that DJ booth. There was another night on at the Sound Factory. They played on the stage rather than in his booth because he wouldn't allow anyone in his booth. The only person allowed in there was the lighting guy.
He'd put his scent all over it. It's like a cat. Like
He cocked his leg up proper.
Yeah.
And gave a good old squirt. Good old squirt of New York disco.
These are the tales we came here to hear. So yeah, just
But
amazing.
I was one of the kind of chosen ones because I had a good relationship with him, and he used to do remixes for DMC. So he let me come in the DJ booth with him and hang out and stuff. But I was so in awe of him at the time that I kind of just wanted to be on the dance floor dancing and just staring at him and kind of worshipping him from afar.
Yeah.
I was completely in awe of him because he was. I've never been to a club where the devotion to a DJ was so complete. So people literally were like, "Junior's in a shit mood tonight." I mean, you could just really tell if he was in a good mood, if he was in a bad mood. Like, oh, I can't believe what she's playing now. And, it was just. And there were different areas of the Sound Factory that represented, there were Voguers.
Yeah.
There's a place called Muscle Beach, which was where all the kind of what they called the muscle marers would hang out. And the industry bit was just underneath the DJ booth.
Yeah.
Everyone in the music industry would hang out.
So I guess, in some ways that was a continuation of the sort of levels of veneration that there were for New York DJs throughout the 70s, 80s, people like obviously Larry Levan, Paradise Garage, and all the people that came before him, which we'll get to. So, being there and being amongst those people, I guess hearing their tales of that, only it was, I say bygone era, but I suppose at that point it would still be quite fresh in people's memories. So was that kind of the spark for you to start digging deeper and learning about the history and think about cataloguing or
There was one particular evening at the Sound Factory where myself and this is where I met Frank Broughton, by the way. Even though he's from Lincolnshire, he was living in New York, and we met through DMC like a week after I moved there, and we sort of became really good friends straight away. And we were out one night at the Sound Factory, and there were these two older gay guys, one called David and one called Scotty. And they used to drive every week down from Connecticut to go to the Sound Factory, and they were survivors of the disco era. And they used to tell us about going to the Loft and going to the Paradise Garage and going to the Saint and all of that. What amazed me about the people in New York who'd survived that era or had lived through that era was just their incredible recall about which DJ had played which record first, which club broke which record. And I was like, how the fuck can you remember that? That's like, that's decades ago. And yet they knew, they knew that like Jelly Bean was the first person to play Wide Boy Awake. And, everyone just seemed to know, who broke which record and when. And and there was like almost a kind of an agreed oral history in New York, and all you had to do is stick a microphone in front of these people and collect this information. So that was the start of it. So when we moved back to the UK, but Frank and I moved back at the end of '96, and we'd been doing our kind of low life parties after the Sound Factory closed in February '95, and we started doing parties after the Sound Factory closed, and we started doing them because we didn't have anywhere to go on a Saturday. Well, we did, but we wanted to do our own little thing. But as soon as we'd kind of started hanging out in New York, we talked about writing a book together. So from early '94, we've been talking about writing a book. And then we were approached in the UK by someone that Frank knew, a publisher, about writing a book for the Ministry of Sound called The Manual.
Oh, yeah.
And we weren't classified as the authors, even though we wrote it. They were classified as the authors, but we were paid a set fee to write it. I think we got like $5,000 between us to write this manual, and basically we wrote it in about 6 weeks. We just like kind of knocked it out. They were really happy with it, and it gave us a thirst for doing more stuff.
Yeah.
So this guy was really happy with what we'd done, and he said, you got any other ideas? So we kind of knocked a few ideas about, and we presented them to him, and he said, well, yeah, these are all right, but he said, why don't you write a history of the DJ? And it kind of crystallized all of the things that we wanted to write about in one subject that made a kind of narrative sense.
Yeah.
So I mean that's how it happened. And actually, weirdly, it's almost exactly 20 years ago, like now, that it came out.
Indeed. I have my well-thumbed copy. It's not the 1999 copy, but the 2000 copy. Yeah, that's the book you want to go out and read if you haven't already read it. This had quite a huge impact on people I knew at the time, and it became a bit of a kind of manual for people trying to find out things they didn't already know. I mean, there was stuff that people already knew, obviously, but then there was a lot of kind of tracks that came about, that kind of petered into people's conscience.
Yeah, I mean, it just seemed to have an impact straight away. I remember going into record stores and seeing people with the track listings at the back open, looking for like Demis Roussos, LOVE, Got a Hold on Me, and you know, all of those things that most people didn't know about. So yeah, I mean, we're both really enormously proud of the effect it's had. It's been translated into about 9 or 10 languages now. It's
really well.
It's sold about 250,000 copies around the world, so it's just done amazingly well. I mean, we're so proud of it.
Do you get like a golden book in a...
No, I don't have a golden book. I don't have a golden book. But yeah, no, I mean, we were really conscious that we wanted to contribute something to dance music culture of the kind of... What annoyed me about the way music was written about was that dance music was like the poor relative of rock music.
Yeah.
And I think the reason for that is that rock music has complex, profound lyrics, and white middle-class men who dominate music writing can pore over these lyrics and find hidden meanings for it. And you can't really do that with dance music because, firstly, a lot of it is instrumental, and the stuff that isn't instrumental, often the lyrics are not really the point of the record. They're kind of a hook, but they're not necessarily there, have a hidden meaning. They're just there. And so I think people underestimate how powerful and great the music is because lyrically it's not necessarily the most complex. But to me, I loved the music just as much as someone loved Bob Dylan. And I felt like it deserved its own history. I felt like the scene that we'd come from deserved to be written about with the same respect that the Beatles are obsessively written about and Bob Dylan is. So that's what was kind of driving, that was our motivating feeling for writing the books that we wrote, was to kind of stay loyal to the scene that we really loved and to document it in a respectful way. I
think it was so well laid out in the fact that you kind of separated it out to some extent into genres and the impact that they individually had. I mean, it gets that what separates writing about dance music from writing about rock music is, I guess, rock music tends to venerate individuals, whereas dance music's more about a collective kind of thing, and you had to be there. But what's nice about a book like this is you get the tales direct from the people, like you were collecting them from, like you say, put a mic in front of somebody and they just tell you stuff. What I found quite incredible was how quickly it seemed that the pair of you wrote this, considering how deep it is. How long did it take you to put this together?
We signed the deal end of September 98, and we delivered the book May the 31st, 1999.
I just think that's incredible. So you'd made a lot of these contacts already, I guess, but still.
Yeah, we had some interviews that we'd done previously that we used in the book, but I think because there were two of us, it did help. So when we went to New York to do interviews, Frank would be doing like 3 interviews in the Bronx with Cool Herc and people like that during the day, and then I'd be tracking down old queens in Manhattan and interviewing them about disco. So, and then we'd come together at night, and we'd do an interview together. So I remember we interviewed David Mancuso together one night. We interviewed Grand Wizard Theodore another night together. So we were basically doing about 7 interviews every day. We were there for a fortnight, and we would just. We really treated it like a job, and then on top of that, we spent a few days doing research in there's a New York Performing Arts Library. We did quite a lot of research in there as well, just kind of going through old billboards and things like that.
Well, I love even the early history right at the start that just kind of details the first instances of, recorded music and what could constitute the first DJ, and we'll brush over who the first DJ might have been in the UK. Read the book, you'll find out. But yeah, just a great read. I'm sort of halfway through rereading it now, because I don't remember much of it because it was the 90s.
Neither do I.
When I read it the first time. I was going to play another wee bit of music, actually. I think this is quite a nice sieg between your New York life and your London life.
Okay.
This is another track from your Tribal Rights comp. I'm having to find the CD to give the name because it's not on the flipping thing, is it? Clifton King, Family Prayer. I didn't know this track at all until I heard it on this. But it came out in 92, which I guess was just before I was listening to house music. 93 is when I got into it. It's a very New York piece of house music, but you were telling me earlier, it's like you think of London.
It actually wasn't that big in New York, I don't think, but it was massive in London. It was a big Paul Trouble Anderson record at the time.
Yeah.
And to me, it just really sums up the kind of garage scene in London from that period.
It's such a banger. It's going to be hard not to play the full thing, to be honest.
We are creators, recreating the creating. We are formators, reformating the formating. It is written, there's nothing new under the sun. We're at the end of an age, so it's time to set the stage for a new child, a thought to be born. Born is peace, born is joy, born is love for man, woman, girl, and boy. Born is peace, born is joy, born is love for man, woman, girl, and boy. Dance to the family prayer. You see the good life will surely meet you there. And while we party, we'll all get closer. Dance to the
still fairly cheap on Discogs as well, by the way. Which is just crazy, the amount of absolute tosh that goes for coin these days, and then pick up these for buttons.
Yeah.
There you go. So, yeah, I'll just fade that out. Much praise to that track, Clifton King. What did they? They did like 112, I think.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It was. I think it was John Robinson that produced it, and John wrote and produced a lot of things. John Robinson was a DJ in New York who was known for. He had a mix show on at lunchtime on every day during the week, and he produced quite a lot of stuff. Really talented producer, and there was a guy who worked for a British label. In fact, he ran a British label called Freetown. I can't remember his name now, but he was like Korean or Japanese or something, and he was I don't want to libel the dead or anything, but he was a fucking lunatic, and
there's a lot of them in the biz.
And he used to come over to New York and set himself up in a hotel and invite all of these producers to kind of come and play him tracks with like a mountain of cocaine on the coffee table and basically pretty much freebasing for 7 days straight. And then he'd go home and he'd put out a lot of good tracks via Freetown. But anyway, he was driving back. He'd driven John Robinson to a gig in Birmingham, drove him back, and they crashed and both died in the crash. And knowing what he was like, I'm fairly sure I know what state he was in when it happened. So unfortunately, John died very young. Like
Wow.
about, I think that was 96 on the M6 or the M1 in Britain. And he was a really nice guy.
My word, I didn't.
But yeah, so
Yeah.
John Robinson produced that.
Wow. Rest in peace. I didn't know that it had that sad side to it.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, yeah, that makes it even more poignant and more moving a piece of music. Now, I'm going to have to move on swiftly because I'm getting a bit emotional about that. So, at what point did you? So you got back to London. What was that? 96.
End of 96, yeah.
And sort of going through your discography and stuff, trying to do my research, and like, when did this sort of the kind of production thing start, or the compiling, working for labels? Was that around then, 97?
No, when well, the reason I moved back was A, because my girlfriend at the time's father was dying of cancer and she wanted to spend the last few months that he was alive, and B, because one of my best friends in New York was Rob DiStefano, who ran Tribal America, and he was plotting a escape from Tribal America and setting up a label himself that he had full control over, because Tribal America, he was an employee of IRS and Tribal America was a subsidiary of IRS, so he didn't really control it even though he'd built it.
That was the IRS. I always used to see that on the records. I was like,
IRS as in the Miles Copeland's label.
All right, okay.
Yeah, not the
No,
IRS,
not the
the
IRS.
Inland Revenue.
I'm an idiot.
I don't think they've ever run underground house labels, to be honest.
I thought I was just wondering some legal thing, like.
No, but he'd managed the police, and I think that was the big joke, was IRS and the police and blah blah blah. Anyway, he was setting up a label called Twisted, and he wanted me to move back to the UK to set up the UK branch of Twisted. So that's what I did. I moved back, and I spent the first year back in the UK setting up Twisted. And unfortunately, we had, I mean, it sounds really bad, but we had a hit with one of the first releases, Fired Up by Funky Green Dogs, got in the top 20 and was on top of the pops. And so, and we had this distribution deal with Universal, and suddenly they were like asking where the next hit was coming from. And it was a fluke that it happened, and there were no more hits. So I was coming under increasing pressure to deliver hits that we didn't have, and so after a year of that, it was like, so they basically Universal sacked me, and then from there, that's when I started working free. I've been freelance since then, so that was kind of like end of 97. So the compiling started not long after that, really. I can't remember what the first one. The first compilation I might have done was for Harmless, but I can't really remember now. It's so long ago. Right. But I started compiling albums about 20 years ago. And again, that came through record collecting. I mean, you know, record collecting has really given me most of the things that I do now have really stemmed from collecting music. And compiling is another one. And I can't remember the first one. It could be Strut, it could be Harmless. I can't really remember. It's too long ago.
Well, they're all great. They're all there for the take, and this is partly why I've chosen your compilations solely to choose music from for tonight. We'll get on to DJ history, I guess now. Mindful of the time, we are going to open out the floor to questions in a bit. By the way, so don't worry, keep them in your heads. The last half hour, we'll see how we get on. DJ history set up in the early 90s, was it? 2000?
We launched it in 2000 as an adjunct to Last Night a DJ Saved My Life. So the idea originally was to put edited versions of some of the interviews that we'd done on there. But when it really kind of came alive as a site was in 2003, we kind of redesigned it and added a forum. The forum kind of suddenly changed the dynamic of the site, and people started hanging out on the forum a lot, and that kind of that was the thing that really built DJ history more than anything, was the fact that there were the world's bearded nerds were all kind of gathering every evening to talk about rare Gilbert O'Sullivan B-sides, and that's kind That's
Are there any?
yeah, there are. Yeah.
Oh, I
Well,
missed
not
that one.
rare, but
Yeah.
do you know "So What" by Gilbert
I don't
O'Sullivan?
actually know.
It's a banger, mate.
Ah.
1985, killer.
Wow.
Anyway, but leaving aside Gilbert O'Sullivan bangers, yeah, it was weird. It just seemed to kind of attract like all of the biggest nerds in every country in the world. I mean, that's how I met Prince Thomas and Todd Terrier and Strange Fruit and all of the Norwegian guys and just everyone else as well. It just it was weird. It snowballed.
And it was pre-social media days, so that was
Yeah, it was
obviously
pre-social media.
specialized kind of area that
Yeah,
people could hang out and do that.
yeah.
And I mean, I guess it had a huge impact at the time on the scene for the years that it was around. Was it 13 years it must have gone for?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And your decision to wind that up eventually was based on, I guess,
Poverty.
poverty. Okay. Was it? Do you feel like social media had taken over by that point?
Yeah,
as
I
well?
think, well, we'd sort of, around 2009, we'd got an offer from an investor to try and turn it into a business,
Yeah.
which wasn't a terrible idea, but I think we launched it basically just as the Lehman Brothers were going bankrupt and the whole world was going into an economic
Yeah.
decline. So we launched it at a terrible time, really. That really didn't help us. And what we learned from doing it was that our kind of clientele, we wanted to try and create a digital site, but actually what the people that came to our site loved were objects.
Yeah.
They loved the books that we were publishing, because we published 5 books while we were doing it. And I realised really that what everybody that came to DJ History loved were actual things.
Yes.
They liked records, they liked books, they liked T-shirts, they like physical objects of, and so they weren't interested in digital downloads and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, and it became very hard to kind of make we never went bankrupt. We just kind of wound it down, really. So, but it was obvious that it was hard to make a living from just the digital aspect of it.
Yeah. The 2 books that you published in that time, I should mention, which I don't have with me. I'm going to admit, I should have, shouldn't I? I was hoping you'd bring me copies, Bill, but never mind. How to DJ Properly.
Oh yeah, that came out in
2003.
2003.
And that was off the back of DJ History's
Well,
early years,
the reason we added a forum was because we'd done How to DJ Properly. Basically, our agent, after we'd written Last Night a DJ Saved My Life, said, go away now and come up with 5 DJ-related ideas. He said, if you keep writing about this subject, you'll be the kind of owners of the subject. And actually, it was the best piece of advice I've ever had. It was a natural thing for me anyway, because I was involved so heavily in everything. But I wouldn't have automatically thought, let's do another book about the same thing, had he not said, go away and think of another idea about the same thing. Go and write about exactly the same thing, but slightly differently.
People liked that one. Let's have some more.
Yeah. And the publishers, a couple of publishers really loved the idea, and we got a really good advance, and then there was a bidding war in America, and so we got like 50 grand advance in America, and actually that book has made more money than Last Night, because it was sold at a higher price and you get a percentage as a royalty. So we've made more money from that book.
And the record players was a few years
The
later?
record players we published when we were running DJ History as a business. So that was part of... We did 5 books. We did the Disco Files. We did the...
Got that one. I didn't bring it. It's too valuable.
The Best of Boys Own one. We did a Best of Soul Underground. We did Raving 89, which was Gavin Watson's photographs.
Oh, yeah.
And then we did the record players. So we did those 5 books in total. And most of them did really well, but the Soul Underground one did really badly. That was the one that kind of tipped us over the edge from sort of poverty to abject poverty.
Right.
And we kind of thought, fuck this for a game of soldiers.
But in the meantime, the DJing thing keeps going. You've been doing that all the time. That's been going on, and that's been a fairly solid thing for you, would you say?
Yeah. I mean, you sort of get to a point, I think, with something like that where you go beyond the vagaries of fashion and you're just kind of there as a permanent part of the ecosystem. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's important when you're DJing to still be on top of what you're doing, because it is such an ephemeral job in a lot of ways. And you know, as soon as there's a chink in your armour, there's some 18-year-old kid ready to not only step in your shoes, but step on your head while getting to the shoes. So I think you've got to you can't just automatically think, yeah, I'm going to get booked because I'm fucking old. I think you've got to have a little bit more about you to do that. And I do put quite a lot of effort into playing, and I love playing. Yeah. And I love looking for music and you know, I mean, basically what you are as a DJ is a music salesman. You're basically telling people what's good in music for 2 hours. That's what DJing is, isn't it? It's kind of like, hopefully with entertaining them at the same time and making them dance,
and informing.
Yeah,
edutainment as
yeah, but I don't know. I'm kind of, I mean, obviously that is an important thing, but I think for me first, it's kind of like making sure people are having fun.
Yes.
I don't want it to seem like I'm going to make you listen to this Gilbert O'Sullivan record, whether you like it or not. I
feel
think,
this is going to get played tonight.
Got a bit. Poor old Gilbert's getting a bit of battering here tonight, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, talking of slightly unexpected, tying it in with pieces of music, many pieces of music that you've turned me on to, a few of which I played tonight. I think it was the Boiler Room that you did a few years ago, and you played this one as the starting track, and subsequently was on the After Dark compilation for Late Night Tales, and it's been reissued now as an album. Yeah. Last year, which I've not managed to pick up yet, but you did the liner notes for that.
I did,
which I've not managed to read yet. Again, another piece of research I've failed to do. Never mind. I'm looking forward to reading them at some point. So Marty Kane, who those of us of a certain age might remember more as a comedian and New Faces presenter. I don't think I really knew that she had this musical career, and I heard that track. I'm going to play it now. Love the Way You Love Me. Such a banger. Is that loud enough? You could do it being louder, couldn't it? Oh, thank you. Intro, isn't it?
Get on with it, Marty. We ain't got all night.
Come on, Marty.
Love the way you dance the way you love the way you're thinking, what you're thinking of. And if we only have one night like this, love the way you kiss, love the way you kiss, love the way you move, moving closer now.
Again, the temptation to let this one just ride out for its entirety is very strong. You could play this later on, couldn't you?
I could, yeah.
That means you have to come down later if you want to hear the whole thing. It's so good. But yeah, I'm conscious we've got limited time left before we open it out to the floor. How did you come across this record anyway?
Okay, I've got a friend who's a fellow music enthusiast called Hayden, and he works as a travelling salesman. And because he works as a travelling salesman, he gets to look in charity shops all over the UK. And occasionally he comes up with, he's had so many amazing finds of this kind of thing. Yeah. And so he told me about it about 15 years ago. And
just gonna get the change, hold on. Right, it gets better. Anyway, sorry, carry on. You told you.
Anyway, he's the guy that put me onto it, and then you know when you're looking for a record, you know it's not easy to find, and you kind of, it's a really bad trait of a record collector, but like you keep your trap shut until you've found a copy, and then when you've found it, you're like, yeah, I've got a copy of this now, and the clamour sort of gradually grows over a record. But you know, when you're looking for it, you keep stum. Yeah. So I didn't say anything because it took me about 5 years to find the fucking record. It was quite a hard record to find. And actually, I think there are a few on Discogs now out there. But at the time, because I didn't want to alert anyone, I was kind of, on the down low, looking in every charity shop I went to see if I could find it. Yeah. And I kept turning up loads of Marty Kane albums, but never that one. Yeah. So, and eventually I bought a New Zealand issue copy of it off it on eBay. That's how I found it. Wow. But yeah, it's my friend Hayden that should take the credit for that, really.
Big up Hayden. So, yeah, I mean, if there was a New Zealand copy, they must have sold a fair few at the time.
No, it was issued in New Zealand and the UK only. But these kind of records have inspired a strange loyalty in me for kind of shit British 70s pop stars making good records. Yeah. And in actual fact, I'm in the middle of making another compilation. Me and Bob Stanley from St Etienne have put together a compilation, which we're just getting ready to license now, that has got it's got Gilbert O'Sullivan on it, it's got Roy Orbison on it, it's got all the greats basically. Yeah. So yeah, I've always been fascinated by, because almost every artist that lived through the 70s had a bit of a funky or a disco period, and generally not that successfully, but occasionally they're like this. They're just really amazing records.
So the things I was going to try and mention at some point is the sort of thread of uniquely British sensibility, but that kind of Brit funk, the thing you hear in sort of 70s library music, sort of KPM stuff or whatever. I hear a lot of that in the stuff you play out or the stuff you put on compilations. Sorry, Mark, we're going to have to say bye-bye. It's too distracting. I just want to turn it up. It's nearly finished anyway, so there you go. You were sort of saying earlier on, I think before we started this, how that era, that first single you did, and listening to a certain ratio and whatnot, 23 Skidoo or however, influenced your whole approach to music or your tastes in music to this day.
It did massively. But the other thing that what I found liberating about DJing was that having grown up as an NME reader, an NME used to take a line on a particular artist and decree whether you were allowed to like that artist or that band or whatever. And what's liberating about DJing is it's purely, is this tune gonna rock a dance floor? I don't care whether it's by Roy Orbison or whether it's by Underground Resistance. It's like, is this record going to work on this dance floor? And that's actually quite a liberating thing, that you don't really have you don't care about the credibility of the artist or the record. Just, is this record banging, basically? Is it going to work?
I sometimes wonder, though, but I mean, I guess I probably don't get out enough these days to be able to comment, but I wonder sometimes, or maybe even worry slightly, that a lot of new stuff that comes out, or even older stuff, its worth is determined by a bunch of people online rather than a bunch of people on the dance floor. So, or maybe even the boiler room effect. People see a video from somebody hundreds or thousands of miles away, and they're like, "That's an amazing track," but they weren't there and amongst the dance floor. So there is almost like a weird new kind of.
There is.
I mean,
I can totally see the disadvantages of boiler room. I mean, I don't quite get the
I'm not trying to have a pop at that.
Watching 50 people dancing in a warehouse somewhere is not my idea of fun necessarily. Having said that, as a 14-year-old, if I could sit and watch YouTube of really amazing DJs playing great music, I think that's a great thing. And I didn't have that when I was a kid. So.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, there was a woman. Came into the record shop. I work in Underground Solution in Edinburgh. Everybody knows, it's fine. But anyway, I was making a disparaging comment about boilers. It's quite a few years ago now, and she was like, "I live in a shitty little town somewhere in the middle of nowhere in America. I don't have access to these things, so this is amazing for me. I can
Yeah, exactly.
see these
So
events
I can
so
I can see the advantage of it.
Yeah.
So, I like the fact that music is much more democratic now. There used to be gatekeepers to music,
yes,
and you had to kind of get past them in order to get access to tunes. And
yeah,
whereas now it's like the Wild West. Anything is possible, and I quite like that, even if it does mean wading through 20 times more shit records to get to a good record.
yeah,
I mean, that can be quite dispiriting, but
yeah.
I'm glad that a 13-year-old kid can listen on their computer and find great music without having to kind of get past all the blokes with beards at the counter.
You made a few disparaging comments about beards. There's a few there. Yeah. It's like a jealousy. It's a jealousy thing. I think it's fine. So, I mean, yeah, I was going to try and touch on DJ futures and what you see in the future, but it's a kind of
Oh, fuck
bullshitty
that.
question.
Who cares about that?
No, exactly. Well, I don't know. I wonder sometimes because I've got a teenage daughter and she doesn't seem remotely as interested in music, and I think a lot of her peers are the same. They don't have the same. It's not like their whole world like it was.
My
for
daughter
us.
is completely obsessed with music,
Okay,
and
well,
it's
that's good.
completely independent to me.
Right.
I've been very careful not to be prescriptive. I
Yes.
encourage my kids to like music, but I didn't really want to be like ramming things down their throat
No,
because
no.
I grew up discovering things myself, and I thought it
Yeah.
would be a nice way of doing it. So yeah, she's very, very passionate and knowledgeable about music, and has started introducing me to things as well.
Well, that's the incredible thing. I mean, when I say my kid's not as interested as maybe we were, but there's a different kind of interest, and what is interesting is the fact they have access to a century of recorded music,
Yeah.
and they don't give a shit now what period in time it comes from. So they'll listen to stuff. She'll play me stuff in the car, whatever, from the 1920s or from the 70s or 80s.
Yeah.
If she's seen it on a meme or she's heard it in a movie or whatever.
I
whole
think that
criteria-
the younger generation are much more open-minded about
Yes,
music than
yeah.
our generation. I think we were still very much raised in that kind of tribal era of music, and I don't feel like they're anywhere near as tribal now.
So that's maybe the distinction to me, I think, when I say they don't seem as passionate. It's not the right word. Tribal, I guess, is the thing. And, yeah, they're less snooty about it, which is a
Yeah.
great thing. Let's face it. We've got plenty of time for questions from the audience, so I think we'll allow them a chance to shine. Before we do that, I don't think he made it. Beefy, are you here? He didn't make it. He gave me a couple of questions to ask you, so I'm going to kick things off from the audience, from
Beefy.
Beefy. Keith Monroe.
Apologies to vegetarians.
He asked, this is a cracker, would you rather have one £100 record or 100 £1 records?
100 £1 records.
I thought you'd say that. That, I suppose, is a timely question, though, given that you've just
I've just sold my record
sucked
collection.
them off.
Yeah.
And I got the alert from DJ Friendly, if anyone's interested. Can I give you a plug? Can I
Well,
give you a
give him a
record?
plug. I don't
Give
own
Nick,
him
no,
anymore.
you don't care. So
Yeah, DJ Friendly.
Help DJ Friendly.
Nick the record, bought my collection off me.
yeah. So, do you want to talk about that? Should we do it?
I was moving house to a
Yeah.
smaller house.
Yeah.
I had 13 to 15,000 records. They were taking up a lot of room. I had one record room, and then 3,000 of them had kind of seeped into another room.
Yeah.
And they're a bit like moss, aren't they? Records. Once once they start spreading, you can't
Yeah.
really stop. And I'd gone through some changes in my life, and I thought, actually, what would happen if I sold them all? And the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like quite an appealing thing to do, to kind of rid myself. I mean, I'm a bit of a hoarder anyway, so I also collect magazines. I collect original Penguin paperback novels. I've got Grimsby Town programs, Grimsby Town what they call tickets. I've got like loads of loads of flyers in boxes. I mean, I'm just a bit of a fucking crazy hoarder, and I thought, wouldn't it be good to get rid of a lot of this stuff and kind of start from zero again? So I gave away my magazine collection to Test Pressing. My friend Paul runs a website called Test Pressing. I gave all my novels away. I gave lots of things away, basically, and then I sold my record collection to Nick the Record and moved into a new house with considerably fewer possessions than I'd moved into it. So it was a kind of like a life cleansing episode, and I kept all of my CDs, and I've got like about 15,000 digital tracks. It's not like I've stopped listening to music.
You still got
so
the memories.
my collection is down to about 150 records now.
And the records will find new life with new owners. And
well, I hope so. I mean, many of those records I've had since I bought them new. I mean, there's quite a lot I bought secondhand, I suppose, but many more that I bought new.
Yeah.
And the thought of someone else giving them some more love is great. I remember in the 90s when I was living in New York, I used to go shopping in San Francisco quite a lot. And you were acutely aware that the reason there were so many amazing disco records for sale in San Francisco was because of AIDS. Yeah. And a lot of them had DJs' names on them and DJs that were no longer alive. And so I felt like it was my duty to love those records in the way that they'd been loved in the 1970s. So hopefully there are people, not that I'm planning to kick the bucket or anything, but hopefully people will get enjoyment out of those records the way that I did.
I do find there's something poetic about I've been in that position where I've been selling records that belong to people who've moved on to the next realm, and you can picture the places where these records were played. You can picture the memories they have. If you think about the sweat in a dance floor that gathered and found its way into the grooves on those records, and they're going to find new life somewhere else.
Yeah,
it's like, it's a very poetic, beautiful thing. Anyway,
absolutely.
you're gonna keep DJing for years to come. So
until
rock till you drop.
My mobility scooter is primed and ready for takeoff.
Yeah, I want one of those. That'd be great. The other question Beefy had, this is his last question. This was, I think, he took his cue from the Jeremy Deller documentary, Everybody in the Place. Did you watch that?
Yeah, when I was in a festival in Marrakesh, they showed it. So.
Oh, wow. Ooh, cool spot. It's a great documentary, and he talks about the YouTube Happy Place, the video that he watches. I think it's the folks in Detroit on public access TV dancing to Charivari.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's so good.
The Place, I think it's called, wasn't it?
Yeah. Do you have a YouTube Happy Place along similar lines?
Well, actually, that's one of them. The black kids dancing to Charivari. I love that.
It's crazy. It's a clip I was aware of as well, and I'd seen before, but I'd never seen it in almost its entirety, or at least the length that he sort of shows it on the doc. In fact, I went and found it, and I was like, oh shit, yeah.
Also, the Filipinos dancing to Thriller, the Filipino prisoners.
Prison,
that's another one that cheers me up on a cold day.
Yeah, we all need those, especially here. Yeah. So I will invite the audience now, I think, to ask some questions. I think what we'll have to do for the benefit of viewers and listeners is I'll repeat your questions. I'll try not to mimic your voice when I do so. Has anybody got any questions? Please feel free to raise a hand if you have any questions. Yes?
What was one of the records that you couldn't let Nick the Record get his hands on?
What was one of the records that you couldn't let Nick the Record get his hands on?
Okay, so I haven't gone through various kind of periods of how I should get rid of them. I decided the only ones I would keep are ones that I'd had a direct involvement in. So if I'd produced it or written it or remixed it or compiled it, I'd keep one copy of each of those. So that was about 60 to 70 records that I kept through that. And then I knew that I had to go and DJ in Manchester tomorrow, playing on one vinyl deck. So I kept a little box of 45s that I brought with me on this trip to play in Manchester. And then Nick left a small box behind of about 35 records, and I thought, oh, fuck that, I can't be bothered to send them to him. And so I've kind of...
I'll take him, Bill.
So I've kind of inherited about 30 records that he was supposed to take, but he forgot. So yeah, random, kind of. No. I thought it was too complicated to do that, because that way I would never get rid of it. I'd be like, oh, I can't get rid of it. Because when I've tried to do that before, I'd end up like selling like 5 and keeping 3,000. So it just never works, that idea. I think you've got to be a bit more Maoist about it and kind of, you know, burn down everything behind you as you kind of walk through the record room. So yeah,
About this. Okay, you got rid of all your collection. He said, well, what is the record that you will save? I will be more specific, and I will ask you the typical desert island question. So, what is the record that represents you the most? What is the record of your heart?
What's the record? What is the one tune that represents you the most, Bill?
There's 2 different questions.
Oh.
The record that represents you the most doesn't necessarily have to be the record or the tune of your heart. So.
Okay, so the tune of my heart would be Sit Down and Cry by Ella Washington, that came out on an album on Soundstage 7 in 1965. And it's a really beautiful Southern soul song that I first heard on Andy Kershaw's show about 30-something years ago. I think the most important record in my life probably is Rock On by David Essex. It was like the first record I bought as a kid that I really, really fell in love with. The production and the music and also him. He was so beautiful. He's such a beautiful man. When I was 13, I had a proper boy crush on David Essex. And even now, that record to me sounds fucking monumental. It's just such an incredible piece of music. Yeah, it was the one. It wasn't the first record I bought. The first record I bought was Ernie, the Fastest Milkman in the West, which now that's definitely not one of my Desert Island discs.
I would argue that still sort of points to the strand of vaguely humorous British kind of thing that runs.
Well, I don't know if you know this, but you know Stand and Deliver by Adam and the Ants?
That was one of my first records.
Well, that is pretty much based on Ernie, the Fastest Milkman in the West. If you the words to Ernie, the Fastest Milkman in the West fit perfectly to Stand and Deliver. It's actually quite weird. So it'll forever change your feelings about Adam and the Ants.
And you both wore uniforms.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And they both chased people around in high speed.
Played by a saxophone following them.
Well, you know, there's no milk float, but you know, Adam Ant walked into a bar waving a gun around, dressed as a cowboy.
He did.
Yeah. Probably should glaze over that. Okay, that's good answers. Anyway, any other questions? I see a hand. Hi, Adam.
Hi, You're talking about, sort of New York extensively. What do you think to the Detroit house scene on techno? Because that's, I'm from that era of the late 80s as well, and been a massive sort of purveyor of that as well.
What's your take on Detroit?
I wasn't. I've been to Detroit a few times, and I've obviously been interested in it, possibly more because of Motown than techno. The first time I went, I was really much more interested in soul music, but it's weird because when it was happening in the late 80s, it felt like an adjunct of Chicago, really. But it was only when I met a couple of people from Detroit that I started to understand how unique and different it was from Chicago. I know for a fact that, like, in early magazine articles that I found, that people in Detroit were calling it Detroit House at the time. But I think it was distinct from Chicago House. It definitely did have a different sound. It had different influences that were actually probably more European than Chicago did. Much more, you know, craft work and things like that had influenced the people there. But I guess the reason it was kind of overshadowed a bit was because it didn't have as many clubs going on, and there's only really the Music Institute that was kind of the big influential club in Detroit at the time. But I mean, I do love that late 80s Detroit sound a lot, and much more than kind of European techno's never really done very much for me. It always seemed a bit too fast and a bit soulless, whereas the Detroit thing had a black feel still, and that's kind of what appealed to me about those kind of records that were coming out in the 80s, both like electro and house and hip hop and all of those kind of things. I just became more and more obsessed with electronic music in the 80s. But I mean, the journey of that started out listening to like TVOD by The Normal and Being Boiled by Human League and Nag 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 by Cabaret Voltaire, stuff like that was my kind of introduction into electronic music, really. But the black kids seem to be doing it in a much more interesting way.
Funnily enough, I put Six Music on yesterday morning, and the first tune that I heard, Lauren Laverne played last night, A DJ Saved My Life by In Deep. And 2 tracks later, Being Boiled by the
Really?
Human League. Yeah,
Spooky.
Standard kind of thing.
One time I went to see the Human League playing at the Marquee down Wardour Street. It's a venue that doesn't exist anymore, but it was like quite a big sort of punk and post-punk venue. And Barry Manilow was stood at the back watching them in a tangerine suit with two massive black guys either side of him.
Are you sure?
Yeah, the Ruts were supporting.
What?
Yeah, he was watching the Human League. It was one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But I mean, you couldn't miss him as well because he's got a massive conch and he was wearing a tangerine suit.
Yeah. Wow.
A couple of giveaways for you.
Yes. I was struggling to take that one in.
Sure it wasn't my dad.
I think you'd have to show me photographs later, mate.
Oh. Crikey. Any other questions? Anyone want to raise a hand?
Well, I liked that you were talking about ACR because I bought Shack Up when it first came out in early 80s, and I thought it was their song, and that completely turned me on to something completely and utterly different, because for years I used to play to people and go, this is ACR, they're amazing, that's their song. Somebody said to me, no, that's Bambara, Shack Up. And I went, what? And then I went and I bought the single by them, and then I suddenly realised there was funk out there, and it totally changed my whole, as you were talking about, it changed my whole life from that post-punk thing, and I suddenly went on to funk, and it, like overnight, by just one record.
Yeah, I mean, I heard Shack Up by ACR before I heard Bambara's version, and actually I was so obsessed with ACR that they, in interviews, I remember them name checking Cameo before Cameo crossed over, and another funk band called Spunk, who recorded on Gold Coast, and I started looking in markets for like 7 inches of Cameo and Spunk and bands like, and through that started discovering other bands. So yeah, I was totally indebted to a certain ratio for putting me onto that kind of music.
What was the first Cameo one you picked up? Remember?
Rigor Mortis on Chocolate City, 1977.
Yeah, good era.
It was a good year for the Roses.
Yeah. And the Damned. Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's a sort of joke in there. That was
Somewhere.
76, yeah.
Yeah, that was 76.
Yeah, okay. Terrible. Somebody else got a question, surely. I'm out of patter here. Yes, hi Steve.
If you repress the record players, would you miss Jimmy Savile?
No. We did a new version of Last Night a DJ Saved My Life for the American market, and that came out after Jimmy Savile had died. So we rewrote that chapter. I don't think you can. I mean, sometimes history is a bit inconvenient and it doesn't exactly go how you want it to go. And so everything that he did still stands. What changes is maybe his motivation for what he did. We'll never know, really. We'll never know the answers to any of those kind of things. But the fact is, he did the things that he did. So we had to rewrite it in a way that was respectful towards victims of Jimmy Savile while still acknowledging the things that he did. It's kind of difficult because I don't think it's right to erase someone out of history because of an inconvenient background to their story. You know, a lot of technology that we enjoy today was developed by the Nazis. It's, you know, it is a fact. Those things are facts. That the development of tape recording was completely down to Nazi technology. So, you know, there's a lot of things that are inconvenient, really. NASA and their attempts to get on the moon, a lot of that stuff was developed by German scientists who were funded by the Nazis as well. I mean, you know, there's lots of things that are not great about the world, but I don't think you can't really erase the bits that you find a little bit inconvenient. So no, we didn't and we wouldn't, but we did change how we wrote it.
Yeah, as it is, I don't think you were exactly singing his praises in the original anyway. You kind of... People acknowledged at the time that he was a dodgy character.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we didn't know just how dodgy he was. No, exactly. But, I mean, everyone thought he was really fucking weird, didn't they? I mean, you know, I think there's no question about that.
Yeah, you got to trust your instincts sometimes. Has anyone got a question, a less downer question? Thanks, yes. Yes.
You said earlier that Sneaky Pete's was, I think, your second or first favourite venue in the UK, and I was just wondering if you came up with, you know, a list of, in the UK, a list of, do you have a number one?
What possible venue is better than Sneaky Pete's, Bill?
In terms of small venues, it's my favourite venue in the UK, definitely. There's another one. There's like a pubs that these guys have opened in St Leonards-on-Sea, which is the most unlikely town ever to have a really great club.
Where's that? Forgive my ignorance.
It's next to Hastings on the south coast. And it's amazing. I've played there twice this year, and they're two of the best parties that I've done this year. I mean, it's just really great. And what I love about Sneaky Pete's is it's tiny, but there's just a killer atmosphere every time you go. It really feels... There's just something special about that place. I don't know what it is, but Corsica in London is one of my favourite venues as well. I love that. I mean, you know what really helps is when you like the people that run a venue, because there are so many sharks involved in club ownership and sometimes club promotion, that finding people that you actually like to work with is a big thing. And people who are doing what they do for the right reasons is a big thing as well, and it does make a difference. And the people at Sneakies do what they do because they believe in it, and the people at Corsica do what they do because they really believe in it. And I think it shows in how those clubs are run. Fabric as well, actually. You know, they always. When I played there in the late 90s and early noughties, they always approached everything from a musical point of view, and most club owners don't. They approach it from profit and how many people you can get in and how much you can charge them for a drink and all of that kind of stuff.
Makes such a big difference, doesn't it, when the people behind the spot care. I think it's interesting as well how many pivotal kind of moments have occurred with a very small gathering of people. If you think about the famous Sex Pistols gig in Manchester Free Trades Hall, where 15 people were there, but they all went and formed bands, or like, you know, the tiny island of Jamaica basically invents DJ culture that infects the whole world. Yeah, you know, you can do a lot with a small space, can't you? Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. Sneaky Pete's, 11 till 3 tonight. Bill Brewster.
So smooth.
It's my first time doing this.
And the last.
Yeah. Bill will see to never work
Sweet
again.
dram. For the thirsty Scot.
Can we open that now? Any other questions?
We'll have to be
Anybody?
quick because I'm dying for a wee.
Oh shit! Okay, well listen. I think this is an opportune moment. I think people probably feel like they've had the.
There is actually a question.
Somebody way back. Hello.
The lone groover there.
Oh, I see. There was two. I'm focused that way. You're wearing a hat. The guy not in the hat. Andrew. Yeah.
I actually don't have a question. I was just going to say I don't feel that we've heard that much music tonight. So
I know. Well, I was going to play one of your things actually, Bill. Should we play this to see out the proceedings?
Yeah,
We'll
okay.
come to
Yeah,
this. Did you have a question, Liam? Do you want you ask it in private? Is it one of those questions? We want to hear it now.
You were talking about sharks in the industry. Is there any
Sharks in the
sense you
industry.
can give on like avoiding them, or do you not? You have to deal with them anyway.
How do you avoid
well,
the sharks?
Yeah, I mean, if you find an amazing... I've found loads of amazing venues and worked once with the person and then not worked with them again. Because sometimes the stress is too much. I mean, when I used to do a party called Faith with Terry Farley and a few others, and I remember we did a really great party in a place called Sahara Nights, which is near King's Cross, and is now actually the Big Chill House, I think it's called. And we sold it out in advance, and the guys on the door were basically just letting people in for cash if that had sold out, and it was like really dangerously overcrowded. And that's a really great example of someone having a short-sighted view of how you run a venue, because A, they were jeopardizing people's safety, and B, they were guaranteeing that we'd never do another party there, even though we'd sold it out. So there is no way of avoiding them, but I think, you know, working with them once is sufficient to warn you not to work with them again. And when you find people that you do like and that are honest, stay loyal to them. I think that's the important thing. I mean, the one thing I've learned about working in the music industry is don't work with cunts, because there's lots of them, and find the nice people and stick around them and work with them, because there are really amazing people that are in it because they really love music, and those are the ones you need to find and hang out with. Because life's too short to be dealing with all of that drama, you know. It is really depressing.
Yeah.
And on that cheery note,
sound advice. Sound advice. Thank you, Bill. We'll see out the proceedings on this one piece of music from yourself that I've managed to play tonight. I guess it's Mang Dynasty. Crash the Box from last year. I'm right in thinking you put this up on SoundCloud a few years before it came out, though, right? Yeah, well, here it is. Thanks, Bill, and make sure you get yourselves down to Sneaky's in a couple of hours, 3 hours. Thanks for paying attention, and thanks for your questions. And please drink responsibly, all right?
Sweet dram.
Sweet dram. Why is it not playing, though? There we go. Thanks, Bill. Off you go.